There's a moment when you realize that everything you've been taught about human connection is a lie. It happens suddenly, like stepping off a cliff you didn't know existed. 1 second you're navigating the familiar terrain of pleasing others, seeking approval, measuring your worth by their smiles and nods. The next second you're falling through empty air, and in that terrifying, exhilarating descent, you understand something that changes everything. The person you've been trying so hard to be loved as doesn't actually exist. This is the moment of reckoning. The moment when the social contract you've been unconsciously signing your entire life reveals itself as the elaborate fiction it always was. And in that revelation lies the seed of your transformation into something they will never quite recognize again, something untouchable. The architecture of human relationships operates on a simple principle that no one wants to acknowledge. Power flows toward those who need it least. Watch a room full of people, and you'll see it immediately. The desperate ones, the ones trying too hard, explaining too much, seeking validation, they repel influence like oil repels water. But the one in the corner, the one who seems completely self-contained, completely indifferent to whether anyone notices them at all, that's where every eye eventually drifts. That's where power pools. Machiavelli understood this when he wrote that it is better to be feared than loved. But what he really meant was something far more nuanced. It is better to be irreplaceable than replaceable. Fear and love are both forms of need, and need creates dependency. But when you become truly untouchable, when you operate from a place of complete psychological self-sufficiency, you transcend both fear and love into something far more powerful, respect tinged with fascination. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a death and rebirth that occurs in stages, each one stripping away another layer of who you thought you were supposed to be. The first death is the death of the pleaser, that part of you that contorts itself into whatever shape others seem to prefer. The second death is the death of the explainer, that part of you that feels compelled to justify your existence to anyone who questions it. The third death is the death of the seeker, that part of you that looks outside yourself for validation of your worth. What emerges from these deaths is something unprecedented, a human being who operates by their own internal logic, who answers to their own internal authority, who needs absolutely nothing from anyone else to feel complete. This is not narcissism. Narcissism is still a form of neediness, still desperately dependent on external reflection. This is something far more disturbing to the social order. Genuine self-possession. Let me show you how this plays out in practice. You're in a meeting at work, and someone challenges your idea publicly. The old you would have launched into an elaborate defense, providing evidence, seeking allies, trying to convince everyone of your rightness. The new you does something that makes the room go quiet. You pause for 3 full seconds, making eye contact with your challenger, then say simply, "I can see why you'd think that," and move on to the next topic. No defense, no explanation, no need to be right in their eyes. What happens in that room is electric. The challenger, expecting a fight, suddenly finds themselves holding a sword with no one to swing at. Everyone else witnesses someone so confident in their position that they don't need to defend it. Your idea either stands on its merit or it doesn't, but your worth isn't attached to either outcome. You've just demonstrated something most people never learn. True power doesn't argue. It simply is. But here's where it gets dangerous. The same dynamic that makes you magnetic also makes you threatening. People are unconsciously trained to trust those who need their approval because needy people are controllable. When you stop needing anything from them, you become unpredictable. Unpredictable people disrupt the social order. They remind everyone else of possibilities they've forgotten existed. This is why your transformation will be met with resistance. They'll call you cold. They'll call you arrogant. They'll manufacture crises designed to force you back into the old patterns of explaining yourself, defending yourself, proving yourself worthy of their acceptance. These are tests, and how you respond determines whether you complete your evolution or slide back into the comfortable prison of social dependency. The key is understanding that their resistance isn't personal. It's systemic. You've stopped playing by rules that keep the social hierarchy stable. You've stopped being predictable. In their unconscious minds, you've become dangerous, not because you're hostile, but because you're free. And freedom is the most terrifying thing most people can imagine, because it reminds them of their own chains. Here's a perfect example of how this dynamic unfolds. You post something on social media that expresses an unpopular opinion. Instead of deleting it when the comments turn hostile or engaging in long arguments trying to convince your critics, you do something that breaks their minds. You like a few of the negative comments, then disappear from the conversation entirely. You've just demonstrated that their disapproval has no power over you. You've shown that you can receive their worst and remain unmoved. This drives them absolutely insane because they've just discovered that their primary weapon, social pressure, is useless against you. The psychological principle at work here is profound. Most people's sense of self is externally regulated. They feel good when others approve, bad when others disapprove. They've essentially handed the remote control of their emotional state to everyone around them. When you stop responding to that remote control, you become incomprehensible to them. You're operating by a different set of laws entirely. But this transformation demands sacrifices that most people aren't willing to make. You'll lose friends who were only friends with the version of you that needed them. You'll lose romantic partners who were attracted to your vulnerability, not your strength. You'll lose social opportunities that depended on your willingness to play roles you've outgrown. This culling is not a bug in the system. It's a feature. Every person who falls away was never really connecting with you anyway. They were connecting with your mask, your performance, your need. What remains after this purification process is something extraordinary. Relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than mutual neediness. The people who stay, who are drawn to this new version of you, are operating from their own places of strength. They don't need you to be smaller so they can feel bigger. They don't need you to be uncertain so they can feel wise. They can handle your full presence because they're comfortable with their own. In romantic relationships, this transformation is particularly powerful and particularly threatening. Most relationships operate on unspoken contracts of mutual dependency. I'll be vulnerable so you can feel needed. You'll be vulnerable so I can feel needed. Together, we'll create the illusion that we're complete. When you become genuinely self-sufficient, you shatter this contract. You're no longer available for the dance of codependency that masquerades as love in most relationships. Instead, you offer something much rarer and much more valuable: the choice to be with someone who doesn't need you, but wants you. This is terrifying for most people because it means they have to bring their best selves to the relationship. They can't coast on your neediness. They can't control you through withholding approval or affection. They have to actually be worth choosing every single day. Watch what happens when someone tries to manipulate you emotionally after your transformation. They storm out of the room, expecting you to chase them. You don't. They give you the silent treatment, expecting you to break first. You don't. They threaten to leave, expecting you to beg them to stay. You calmly help them pack. This isn't cruelty. It's the natural response of someone who understands that authentic connection cannot exist alongside manipulation. You're calling their bluff not to hurt them, but to create space for something real to emerge. The deepest level of this transformation involves transcending the need to be understood. Most people exhaust themselves trying to explain their choices, their feelings, their perspectives to others. They believe that if they can just find the right words, the right examples, the right approach, they can make others see who they really are. This is a fool's errand. Understanding isn't something you can force. It's something that happens or doesn't, and your worth isn't dependent on whether it happens. When you stop needing to be understood, you become mysterious. Mystery is magnetism. People are drawn to what they can't quite figure out, repelled by what explains itself too completely. This doesn't mean you become deliberately obscure. It means you stop over-explaining yourself. You answer questions directly but briefly. You share what you choose to share without feeling compelled to share everything. You let people form their own opinions about you without rushing to correct their misperceptions. This creates a fascinating paradox. The less you try to be understood, the more people want to understand you. The less available you make yourself, the more valuable your presence becomes. The less you need their approval, the more likely they are to seek yours. You've accidentally stumbled onto one of the fundamental laws of human psychology. We value most what we cannot easily obtain. But here's where most people misunderstand this philosophy and turn it into a superficial game of hard to get. True untouchability isn't a performance. It's an authentic state of being. You're not pretending to need nothing from others. You actually need nothing from others. You're not acting indifferent to their opinions. You genuinely don't derive your self-worth from their opinions. The power comes from the authenticity, not from the appearance of detachment. The practical applications of this mindset extend into every area of life. In your career, you stop trying to convince your boss of your value and start demonstrating it through results. You don't explain why you deserve a promotion. You become so valuable that your promotion becomes inevitable. You don't argue about your salary. You develop skills that make you expensive to replace and cheap to retain. In social situations, you stop trying to be the most interesting person in the room and start being the most interested. Paradoxically, this makes you far more magnetic than any performance could. People feel seen and heard in your presence because you're not using the conversation to validate yourself. You're genuinely curious about them, which is so rare that it becomes intoxicating. The transformation reaches its completion when you realize that your worth was never up for debate in the first place. All those years of seeking validation, all those nights spent replaying conversations and wondering if you said the right thing, all that energy wasted on trying to control how others perceive you, it was all based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how value works. You don't become valuable by convincing others that you're valuable. You become valuable by being valuable and then letting others discover it or not. Their discovery doesn't create your worth, it simply reveals what was already there. Their failure to discover it doesn't diminish your worth, it simply reveals their limitations. This is the final liberation, understanding that you are always enough, always worthy, always complete exactly as you are. The seeking, the pleasing, the explaining, none of it was ever necessary. It was just the costume you wore while playing a character in someone else's drama. Now you can take off the costume and step into your own story. In this new story, you're not the protagonist who needs to win everyone's love. You're not the hero who needs to save everyone from their problems. You're not the victim who needs others to validate your pain. You're something far more powerful. You're the author. You decide what kind of story you're telling. You decide which characters deserve major roles and which ones get written out. You decide when scenes end and new ones begin. The people who knew the old you will find this transformation unsettling. They'll keep waiting for you to slip back into familiar patterns, to need their approval again, to explain yourself again, to be smaller again so they can feel bigger. But you won't. You can't. You've seen behind the curtain of the social game, and there's no going back to believing in its necessity. Machiavelli wrote that the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Therefore, it is necessary to be a fox to discover the traps, and a lion to terrify the wolves. Your transformation into untouchability gives you access to both natures. You develop the fox's cunning to navigate social complexity without being trapped by it, and the lion's presence to command respect without demanding it. The fox in you learns to read the unspoken dynamics in every room, to understand what people really want beneath what they say they want, to navigate politics without becoming political. The lion in you learns to occupy space unapologetically, to speak truth without softening it for easier consumption, to be fully present without shrinking to make others comfortable. Most people spend their lives trying to be liked by everyone and end up being liked by no one, including themselves. You've chosen a different path, to be fully yourself and let others decide if they can handle it. This path is lonelier in some ways. There are fewer people who can match your energy, fewer people who understand why you've stopped playing games they're still invested in. But it's also infinitely more fulfilling because every connection you make from this place is real. The loneliness you might feel isn't the loneliness of being rejected. It's the loneliness of having outgrown your environment. It's the same loneliness a bird might feel if it were raised among mice and suddenly remembered it could fly. The solution isn't to clip your wings to fit back into the mouse world. The solution is to use your wings to find others who remember they can fly too. This is why your transformation serves everyone, even those who resist it. By refusing to play the game of mutual neediness, you give others permission to stop playing it too. By demonstrating that it's possible to be complete without external validation, you show others that they could be complete too. By being authentically yourself instead of performing a role, you create space for others to discover who they really are beneath their own performances. Some will take this permission and run with it, grateful to finally have someone model a different way of being. Others will resent you for highlighting their own chains, for making their own compromise and conformity feel less noble. Both responses are information about who they are, not about who you are. The ultimate test of your transformation comes when you face coordinated attacks designed to break you back down into familiar patterns. This might come as a social media pile-on where dozens of people are trying to shame you back into compliance. It might come as professional sabotage where colleagues unite against your growing influence. It might come as family pressure where everyone takes turns explaining why your new confidence is actually selfishness. In these moments, every instinct will scream at you to defend yourself, to explain your position, to prove you're still the person they're comfortable with. This is the moment of truth. The old you would have crumbled under the pressure, apologized for being too much, promised to be more considerate of others' comfort. The new you does something that breaks their minds. You remain completely calm, completely unmoved, completely yourself. You don't fight back. Fighting back would give their attack legitimacy. You don't defend yourself. Defending yourself would suggest there's something to defend against. Instead, you do something far more devastating. You remain unaffected. You continue being exactly who you were before their attack, which demonstrates that their disapproval has no power over you whatsoever. This response is more unsettling to them than any counterattack could be, because it reveals the fundamental impotence of their primary social weapon, shame. They've just discovered that you cannot be shamed back into compliance, cannot be manipulated back into neediness, cannot be pressured back into performing a version of yourself that makes them comfortable. The silence that follows this revelation is profound. It's the silence of a crowd that just watched someone walk through fire without being burned. It's the silence of people witnessing something they thought was impossible. A human being who has genuinely transcended the need for their approval. In this silence, something shifts in the social dynamic around you. The people who were attacking you start to back down, not because you defeated them, but because they realize their weapons don't work on you. The people who were watching from the sidelines start to see you differently, not as someone who's arrogant or cold, but as someone who has access to a kind of strength they didn't know was possible. This is when you understand the deepest truth about power. It's not something you take from others. It's something you stop giving away. Every time you sought their approval, you were handing them a piece of your power. Every time you explained yourself to someone who wasn't genuinely curious, you were giving them authority over your choices. Every time you changed who you were to make others comfortable, you were teaching them that your authentic self wasn't acceptable. The transformation into untouchability is simply the process of taking back all the power you've been unconsciously distributing to others throughout your life. It's not about becoming hard or cold or cruel. It's about becoming so fundamentally self-possessed that others have no choice but to deal with you as you actually are, rather than as they wish you were. This creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond your personal relationships. In professional settings, you become the person others look to for leadership, not because you're trying to lead, but because you're not trying to follow. In social settings, you become the gravitational center around which conversations naturally organize, not because you're dominating the space, but because you're fully inhabiting it. The most profound shift happens in how you relate to conflict. Before your transformation, conflict was something to be avoided, managed, or won. Now you understand that conflict is simply information. It tells you what people value, what they fear, where they're operating from. You don't take it personally because you understand it's usually not about you at all. When someone challenges you now, you listen not to defend against their words, but to understand what's driving them to challenge you. Often, what you discover is that they're not really challenging you. They're challenging the part of themselves that wishes it could be as free as you appear to be. Your presence reminds them of possibilities they've given up on, and their anger is really grief for their own abandoned potential. This understanding allows you to respond to hostility with something unexpected: compassion. Not the condescending compassion of someone who thinks they're better, but the genuine compassion of someone who recognizes the prison of social conditioning because they once lived in it themselves. You don't try to save them from their prison. That would be returning to the old pattern of needing to fix others. But you also don't let their attempts to drag you back into their prison succeed. The final stage of becoming untouchable involves transcending even the need to be untouchable. This sounds paradoxical, but it's the difference between performing invulnerability and actually being invulnerable. When you're performing it, you're still reactive, still defining yourself in opposition to others' expectations. When you've actually achieved it, you're beyond reaction entirely. You're simply being who you are, regardless of context, regardless of audience, regardless of consequences. This is when you realize that becoming untouchable was never really about them at all. It was about you remembering who you were before the world taught you to be someone else. It was about returning to the natural state of self-possession you had as a small child, before you learned that love was conditional and approval had to be earned. In this return to your essential nature, you discover something remarkable. You don't need to be untouchable, because you were never actually touchable in the first place. The essential you, the core of who you are, was always beyond their reach. All they could ever touch were the roles you played, the masks you wore, the performances you gave. The real you was always safe, always whole, always free. This recognition is simultaneously humbling and empowering. Humbling because you realize how much energy you wasted trying to protect something that was never in danger. Empowering because you realize that this essential self is not only invulnerable, but infinitely creative, infinitely capable, infinitely worthy of love. Not because others deem it so, but because that's simply what it is. From this place, your relationships with others transform once again. You're no longer interacting from a place of need or defense or performance. You're interacting from pure curiosity and genuine care. You can afford to be open because you know that even if they reject what you share, they cannot touch what you are. You can afford to be vulnerable because you understand the difference between vulnerability and weakness. Vulnerability is strength that doesn't need to prove itself. The people who are drawn to you from this place are the people who recognize authenticity when they see it, who are hungry for real connection, who are tired of the elaborate dance of mutual deception that passes for most human relationships. These connections have a quality that's impossible to fake. They're effortless and energizing, rather than draining and complicated. This is the ultimate paradox of the untouchable path. By needing nothing from others, you become someone others need. By being completely self-sufficient, you become magnetic to others. By transcending the game of social approval, you win it so thoroughly that you forget you were ever playing. But remember, and this is crucial, this magnetism is not the goal. The goal is freedom. The magnetism is just a natural consequence of freedom, like how a flower doesn't try to attract bees, but does so naturally through being fully what it is. The moment you start trying to be magnetic, you've fallen back into the trap of performing for others' approval, just with more sophisticated techniques. The true test of your transformation is whether you would choose to be exactly who you are, even if no one ever noticed. Even if no one ever approved, even if you spent your entire life surrounded by people who couldn't understand you. If the answer is yes, if you would rather be authentically yourself and alone than inauthentically connected, then you have achieved something most people never even attempt: genuine self-possession. This self-possession is your inheritance. It was always yours, waiting for you to claim it. The only question was whether you would have the courage to stop being who others wanted you to be, long enough to remember who you actually are. And now you remember. You are not someone who needs to be loved. You are someone who is love. You are not someone who needs to be understood. You are someone who understands. You are not someone who needs to be approved of. You are someone who approves of themselves so completely that others' opinions become irrelevant. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not that you cannot be reached, but that you cannot be moved from your center. Not that you don't care about others, but that you don't need them to be different than they are for you to be okay. Not that you're above human connection, but that you're available for human connection that's based on truth rather than need. You cannot break. You are unrecognizable. You are untouchable.